New analysis suggests that China's Belt and Road Initiative could derail the climate goals of the Paris Accord. A report by the Tsinghua Center for Finance and Development says that excluding China, countries involved in the project already account for over a quarter of man-made emissions, and that if safeguards are not put in place, their current trajectory could push global carbon levels to nearly double the level needed to cap temperature rises below 2 degrees Celsius. An expert joins us now for more insight on this. Imogen Page-Jarrett is a research analyst with the Economist Intelligence Unit. Imogen, is the climate impact as damaging as claimed in this report?
I think there's definitely growing international recognition that energy investments under the Belt and Road Initiative are having a damaging economic impact, especially investments in coal-fired power plants. So far, there have been reports that China is investing in over 1/4 of global coal-fired power plants outside of China. These have been concentrated in countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. These, of course, are going to increase fossil fuel emissions in these countries. I think it's also important to remember, though, that under the Belt and Road Initiative, China is also investing large sums in renewable energy sources in Belt and Road countries. And it's also important to note that at the moment, there's no real set standard from the Chinese side of what constitutes a Belt and Road project. So there are some less reliable and more polluting projects that are invested by Chinese companies in Belt and Road countries that get put under this Belt and Road umbrella, but are not necessarily approved by the central Chinese authorities.
Imogen, plenty of these Belt and Road projects are already underway. Millions has already been pumped into them. How badly could this report hurt Belt and Road's progress?
So I think the response will be divided. I think there will definitely be increased scrutiny from more developed countries and also international environmentally focused groups. This is not going to change the demand for low-cost energy sources among developing nations. We've already seen this year, when 37 heads of state attended the second Belt and Road Forum in Beijing, that there's definitely still support for this initiative. And there are countries that are willing to put economic development over environmental priorities.
Imogen, the report suggests the Paris Agreement the climate goals rely solely on sort of BRI countries, but it's not as simple as that, is it?
No, I don't think so. And I think it's also important to remember that China is not the only one investing in coal-fired power plants in Southeast Asia. It's also important to look at Japanese and South Korean investments in these kind of facilities. I think one thing all of these countries share is coal-fired power equipment, which they are no longer able to use domestically because of a domestic push towards greener development and greener energy. And this equipment is not going to have a lot of value in 3 to 5 years' time, so they're looking for markets to sell this equipment to. I think it's not just up to these Belt and Road countries to implement the Paris Agreement. It's also up to third-party institutions and more developed nations with the capacity to build awareness, build standards in these nations, and also come up with more cost-effective renewable energy sources as alternatives to coal.
Imogen, you mentioned earlier the issue of green energy initiatives, the origin of which, as you mentioned, may be somewhat dubious in nature, or we don't know enough, perhaps it's not transparent enough at this stage. But what are some measures perhaps that those BRI countries can put in place in order to alleviate their carbon emissions?
So I think there's definitely a need for standard setting. And I think this needs to be agreed under the BRI framework, and China has been putting resources towards greater standard setting. Recently, last November, they signed an agreement with the City of London in the UK to set up a body which will set green investment standards for the Belt and Road Initiative. I think apart from standard setting, it's also really important to have those third-party independent watchdogs and environmentally focused institutions that keep the focus on the environment when it comes to these projects, and also to continue international scrutiny of the Belt and Road Initiative, because that's what's going to push the authorities in these countries to reduce carbon emissions.
All right, Imogen, thank you very much for your perspectives on this report. We've been speaking there to Imogen Page-Jarrett, a research analyst at the Economist Intelligence Unit.